This is called The Assistant. As the summer progressed, it seemed everything was looking up. Oswald continued to feel well, and the Dotted Swiss luncheon was a huge success. The Dotted Swiss ladies, who tended to lord it over the polka dots as far as their needlework was concerned, had been very impressed with the potholders, and Frances could tell they were green with envy over the tomato aspic. I want to know what that is. I don't know what half this food is. Not only had the luncheon been a hit, Patsy was very happy. She had a brand new job. In the past, when asked, Roy had taken Jack out and done a few little shows with him for the local schools or church bazaars to raise money. I've never pronounced that word right. Bazaars. Bazaars. Bazaar. I don't know. I have never said that word right, like my entire life. I have never, I feel like I have, I've heard it before and just have never remembered how to actually pronounce it, but, so I'm sorry, because I probably butcher, a lot of these words. Anyway, but the next time he and Jack were asked to do a show, Roy asked Frances if Patsy could come along. She said yes, and thought it was a fine idea. After that, whenever he and Jack did a show, he started taking Patsy along as his assistant. Frances even bought her a special red striped dress to wear to match Roy's red and white striped jacket and straw hat. I can actually see that in my head. If any of you know what the, Oh, I actually have the perfect analogy. The, Dick Van Dyke in, Mary Poppins, whenever he wore that outfit with the straw hat. That's cute. Anyway, Oswald went with them and helped them set up chairs for the performance. Roy would start the show with Patsy standing beside him and Jack perched on his finger. Come one, come all, and see the amazing Redbird of Baldwin County. He walks, he talks, he crawls on his belly like a snake. The only Redbird in captivity that actually knows his own name. And now my lovely assistant, Miss Patty, and I will demonstrate. Is your name Jack? The bird would bob up and down as if he were agreeing. Yes, he says. Absolutely amazing. But wait. Now you might think a poor dumb bird would not know his right from his left. But observe the amazing Redbird of Baldwin County. At this point, Patsy would hold out her right finger, and Jack would land on it. That is correct, sir. And now the left. Jack would fly over to her left hand. Absolutely amazing. The only Redbird in America, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls of all ages, that can tell me exactly what I have hidden here in my hand. The bird would walk up her arm to her shoulder and nudge her ear. And what did he say the object was, Miss Patsy? He would lean down while Patsy whispered something to him. The bird has said, sunflower seeds. Roy opened his hands and revealed about 10 shiny black sunflower seeds. He is absolutely correct yet again! Ladies and gentlemen, I can hardly believe it myself. Then Patsy would pretend the bird had said something else in her ear and tug on Roy's jacket, and Roy would hold up his hand and say, Wait a moment, ladies and gentlemen, the bird has spoken again. And Patsy would whisper again to Roy. Aha! Said Roy. The amazing Redbird of Baldwin County says he would like to demonstrate his powers of detection. Very well. At this time, I will hide certain objects and test his abilities. Please turn your back, Miss Patsy, while I hide the objects. Patsy would turn away with Jack, as Roy would make a big show out of hiding seeds in all his pockets. Later, of course, Jack, who was a glutton for sunflower seeds, amazed the audience as he crawled in and out of all of Roy's pockets and found every one. After the shows, children would all come up and try to talk to Patsy, but Roy noticed she seemed shy and afraid of other children. Frances saw it too, and it worried her. She tried to invite a few children over to the house to play with Patsy, but it was just no good. All Patsy wanted to do was play with Jack. Frances wondered if in the past children had been mean to her because of her leg. The first time she had bathed her, she had been surprised to see how badly twisted her little body was. She just hoped when Patsy went to school in the fall that the other children would not make fun of her. Alright, Next chapter, 2 men in a boat. Claude heard the redfish were biting, and he had gone all the way up the river to Perdido Bay. I know where that is. I say like I don't live here. Sorry. As he was coming home up the back side of the river late that afternoon, he heard somebody yelling, "Help! Help! Help!" He saw 2 men standing in a shiny brand new blue and white 22-foot boat in the middle of the river, frantically waving. He throttled down his motor and pulled up alongside them. "Hey, fellas, what's up?" "Oh, thank God you came along. We've been stranded here all day," one man said. The other man said, "We must have hit something because the motor just died and wouldn't start again, and we've been drifting around for hours. We must have drifted 5 miles. "Why didn't you use your paddles?" "They didn't give us any," the man said. Claude calmly pointed to the right side of the boat. "Look in that compartment down there. There should be a couple." The larger man on the long side of the panel saw 2 paddles. "Oh. Where did you fellas come from?" We started out at the Grand Hotel in Point Clear. Where are we now?" "Oh my God. I know exactly where that is because I've been to that hotel." Sorry, I get really excited. I've been there. Oh, I used to drive up there all the time. Wow, where the crap are they? I'm trying to figure out where this town is, and that completely threw me off as to where this town was. Sorry. Anyway. Okay. No. It actually must be farther up. Sorry. I was thinking to myself. My bad. Okay. You're all the way to Lost River, about 15 miles... Dang! About 15 miles south. How are we going to get all the way back? Well, let me take a look at this thing. Claude maneuvered all the way around the back of the boat and quickly assessed the situation. "You got your motor all twisted up with silt and mud. Can it be fixed?" "Oh, sure, but we've got to pull it out. We've got to pull it out of the water to do it." He threw them a rope and towed them back to his house. When he pulled up to the dock, Claude looked at the setting sun and said, "It'll be too dark to get you to the hotel by boat tonight, but I'll get Butch to drive you back, and the hotel can send somebody to get your boat tomorrow." As the 2 men gathered up their expensive fishing gear and heavy rods and reels, Claude chuckled. "What were you boys aiming to catch out there today?" Embarrassed that they had to be towed in, they tried to sound like they knew what they were doing. "Oh, speckled trout redfish. I hear they're running pretty good this time of year." "Uh-huh," said Claude. "About the only thing you're liable to catch with that stuff you got there is a shark. Or a whale, maybe." He opened a box and pulled out a string of the biggest bass, redfish, and speckled trout they had ever seen. "Come on up to the house. I'll call Butch." "Thanks, that's mighty nice of you. By the way," said the larger... The phone just went off. Sorry. "By the way," the larger one said, "my name is Tom, and this is Richard. I'm Claude Underwood. Nice to meet you." As the 3 of them headed up the yard, Claude said, "You boys down here on vacation?" "No," said Tom. "We're attending a medical convention at the hotel, but we thought we might try to get a little fishing in while we're here." When they got to the house, Sybil fixed them some coffee, and a few minutes later, Butch came to the door whistling. He was used to being called to take amateur fishermen back home. It gave him a chance to have some fun. "Hey guys, I hear you got lost. That's why we call it Lost River, because if you're up this far, you must be lost." And as always, he laughed at his own joke, thinking it was the funniest thing he had ever heard. When they were leaving, Claude said, "How long are you here for?" Tom just said, "Just 3 more days. Unfortunately, this one was shot to hell." He looked over at Sybil. "Excuse me, ma'am." Sybil laughed. "Don't worry. I'm married to the fisherman, so I've heard that kind of language before." Claude, who felt sorry for them, said, "If you want to do some more fishing, come back tomorrow and I'll take you out and show you a few good spots." Later, when Butch was driving them back to the hotel, he said, "You might not know it, but you just met the best fisherman in the state. If he's offered to take you out, you need to take him up on it." "Thanks, we will," they said. The next afternoon, Butch picked them up and drove them back down to the river where Claude was waiting for them at the dock. "Hey boys, get in," he said, and they climbed into his old green 14-foot flat-bottom boat powered by a small 5-horse Johnson motor and headed out. Claude handed them both a simple rod and reel and explained his method. "I only use this little guy here," he said, and held up his red and white Hedon Vamps book. Never heard of that. "Now I modify it a bit. I take the front limp off and it runs deeper for you. Or else I just use a little lead head jig, but that's all you really need." Before the day was over, the two men were so excited they could hardly believe it. They had caught more fish and learned more about fishing in one day than they had in all their lives. They thought Claude must have been some sort of secret, had some sort of They thought Claude must have some sort of secret knowledge about fish. Claude, always philosophical, said, "Nah, there's no secret to it. Either they bitin' or they ain't." The men came down the next 2 afternoons and had a wonderful time going up and down the river with Claude. And he got a kick out of the two who were obviously city boys, full of enthusiasm and excitement every time they caught something. On the last day that they were there, they tried to pay him for being their guide, but Claude said, "No, you don't owe me a thing." Tom said, "We'd love to pay you for your time." "Thank you, but no, it was my pleasure." "Are you sure?" "Yeah, I'm sure. You fellas don't owe me a dime, but I am going to ask you for a favor." If we can, sure. What is it?" "I know you fellas are both doctors, and I wondered if you would take a look at a little girl for me and tell me what you think." In the past few days, Claude found out that the two men were at the hotel for the Southeastern Convention of Elbow and Shoulder Surgeons. That's so specific and weird. He did not know if they could help Patsy, but he thought it might be worth a try. So he told Francis to have Patsy up at his house that afternoon just in case they agreed to see her. Francis dressed Patsy in her best dress and brought her over, and they sat in the living room with Sybil and Butch and waited for them. When the two men walked in with Claude, he introduced them to Francis and then to Patsy. Tom leaned down and shook her hand. "Hi, Patsy. How are you?" Then he said, "Honey, could you do me a big favor? Would you walk across the room for me?" Patsy looked at Francis, who smiled and motioned for her to do it. Patsy walked across the room and stopped. Tom whispered something to his friend and said, "Now come on back to me." She did. "That's fine, thank you, honey," he said. After a few more minutes of small talk, they said their goodbyes and walked out the door. Claude and Butch followed them out, and they stood in the yard and talked. Tom said, "Mr. Underwood, unfortunately, that sort of birth injury is not our specialty. We deal mostly with sports injuries. I wish we could help, but that girl needs a specialist." "What kind of specialist?" "She needs a pediatric orthopedic surgeon," said Richard. "Kids' bones are tricky, and you need someone with a lot of skill and expertise in that area." Tom looked at his friend and said a name. "Sam Glickman." Richard nodded. "Yeah." Later that night, the phone rang. "Mr. Underwood, this is Tom. Listen, if you can get that little girl up here to the hotel before 8 o'clock in the morning," Sam says he will take a quick look at her before he has to catch his plane back to Atlanta. Claude called Frances and told her to have Patsy ready, and that Butch would pick them up at 6:30 and drive them over to the hotel. When Frances told Patsy that they were going for a ride in the morning, she asked if Mr. Campbell could go with them. "Well, if you want him to, I'll call and see." When she phoned and asked, Oswald said, "If Patsy wants me to come, I'll be there." When he hung up, he was so pleased that Patsy had wanted him to go along. He felt like $1,000,000. Would he go? Why, he would have gone to the moon and back if she had asked. I'm sorry, but my eyes started pricking up a little bit. That's so sweet. Ugh. The next morning, Butch drove the three of them all the way over to Point Clear to the Grand Hotel on the Mobile Bay. I get so excited that I know where that is. At 7:30, wearing only her underwear and her Dr. Pepper hat, Patsy was lying on on a banquet table in the main dining room, being examined by Dr. Samuel Glickman. Frances and Oswald both cringed as they watched the doctor push her leg back and forth, up and down, and then turned her over and felt all the way up her spine, talking the whole time while he was examining her. "You know, Patsy," he said, "I have a little granddaughter about your age named Colby." "My mom has a friend named Colby." And I knew a girl one time. I've only met 2 Colbys my entire life. "And do you know what she told me? Does that hurt?" Patsy made a face like it did, but she said, "No, sir." And then he turned her back over. She said, "Granddaddy?" That's what I call my granddaddy. My grandpa. She said, "Granddaddy, I already have 2 boyfriends. Can you imagine that?" As he sat her up and had her bend over to the left as far as she could, and then to the right, he asked, "Do you have a boyfriend?" "No, sir," she said. "Yes, you do, Patsy. You told me the other day that Jack was your boyfriend. Tell the doctor about Jack, honey." After it was all over, the doctor looked at his watch, picked up his suitcase, and said to Frances, Come walk to the car with me, Mrs. Cleverton," and then turned and smiled and waved. "Goodbye, Patsy." He talked as they walked through the lobby. "Mrs. Cleverton, I would need to do x-rays, of course, but from what I felt, I could say that her pelvis and right hip were broken in 4, maybe 5 places, and whoever did it never bothered to set the bones straight. Does she complain much about pain?" Frances, running to keep up with him, said, "No, doctor, I don't think she said a word about pain." "Well, I don't know why she hasn't, because I know it has to hurt. Those bones are pressing on the nerves in her hip and spine, and the more she grows, the worse it'll get." As he got in the waiting car, Frances blurted out the one question they all wanted answers to. "Can anything be done?" Dr. Glickman looked up. "Mrs. Cleverton, it's not a question of can anything be done. Something has to be done." He handed her a card. "Call my office and set up an appointment," he said, and the car drove away. Frances went back inside and found them all waiting in the lobby for her. "He wants to see her in his office," she said. 2 weeks later, they were swerving in and out of Atlanta traffic while Frances and Oswald reached back and forth over Patsy trying to read the map. I can just picture that, probably Oswald driving, just because I don't know why. Probably Oswald driving, and Frances over on one side, and then Patsy in the middle, and they're all just like reaching back and forth. Finally, they found the medical building and made it on time. Frances said, "How anybody can find their way in and out of this town is a mystery to me." After a series of x-rays were looked at, and all the tests were done, Dr. Glickman called Frances and Oswald into his office, while a nurse took Patsy down to the cafeteria for something to eat. "With a malformation as severe as this," he said, "if we let it go uncorrected any longer, what will happen is that she will begin to lose mobility, and eventually she won't be able to walk at all." Frances grabbed Oswald's hand for support. "Oh dear." "And as she continues to grow, it will begin to affect her central nervous system as well. The sooner we can reset those bones and relieve the skeletal and muscular area from all the stress and strain, the better. But we're talking about 2, maybe 3 separate surgeries. With a child that young and frail, it's a pretty serious undertaking, and it's going to require a lot of strength and stamina on her part to get through it." Frances was alarmed. "You don't mean she could die, do you?" "With any major surgery, there is always that possibility, of course, but from what I have seen, she seems like a pretty happy little girl with a lot to live for. But let me be clear. She will need a lot of emotional support from all of us for the long haul. And even after going through it all, there is still no guarantee she will heal properly." "Oh dear," Frances said. "Having said all that, in my opinion, it has to be done. I just want you to know up front that it's going to be a long, hard process no matter what the results are." Oswald asked, "Will it be expensive?" "I wish I could say no, Mr. Campbell, but yes, it will be terribly expensive, as everything probably is medically. It's not shocking." He glanced down at the picture of his granddaughter on his desk and then flipped through his calendar and looked over his glasses. I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll waive my surgical fees. That ought to help some. If you promise to have her here with a few more pounds on her by the end of July, we can do her first operation the morning of August 2nd. Frances told the doctor that they would be there, and that Patsy would have more pounds on her if she had to feed her 20 times a day. How they would get the rest of the money was another question, but she did not tell him that. For the next month, everybody up and down the street plied Patsy with cookies and candies and as much ice cream as she could eat. They were determined to get those extra pounds on her by the end of... That's so sweet! I'm sorry, I'm going to have a moment that everybody's coming together to care for this little girl. That's so sweet. They were determined to get those extra pounds on her by the end of July, but the main problem was going to be the money. Even without the doctor's fees, it was estimated that the long hospital stay, plus the following months of therapy, would run over $100,000. Frances and Mildred had a little saved, but it was not nearly enough. The Lost River Community Association had several fundraisers, and a large jar that said the Patsy Fund sat by the cash register in the grocery store. Pretty soon, as more people found out about it, other organizations began to help them as well. When Elizabeth, their friend over in Lillian, who was president of their sister group, the Mystic Order of the Royal Dotted Swiss, heard about it, her group held a bake and rummage sale. Lost River had a huge fish fry at the community hall every Saturday, thanks to Claude Underwood, and people came from all over the county for that. As word spread, and courtesy of Butch's friends at the Elks Club over in Alberta, decided to have a fundraiser. They planned a barbecue, and everybody in Lost River attended, along with hundreds of people from all over the county. When Oswald got there, he was in for a surprise. The members of the Alabama Accordion Association had donated their services and were giving a free concert in the park to raise money. They were up on the bandstand dressed in lederhosen. Mr. Krause spotted Oswald and waved, playing the beer barrel polka. Frances and Mildred and Patsy joined them, and they sat in the wooden chairs and listened with the rest of the people. Patsy was on her second cotton candy when suddenly Oswald saw something that made his blood run cold. He had just spotted Brent Boone, the government man, sitting in the front row across from them, and he was looking right at Patsy. Oswald felt his ears turn red. After a few minutes, Boone stood up and walked over to the large wooden barrel that had the Patsy Fund written across it, and threw in $10 and headed up the aisle right towards him. As he walked past, Oswald, who had stopped breathing, he had looked down at him and said out of the side of his mouth, "Mexico my ass," and kept going. Oh, that had me scared. As August approached, Oswald wanted to do something for Patsy, but of course he had no money. But there was one thing that he could try. Even if he only got a few dollars, it might help. Butch drove him over the big Grand Hotel on the bay in Point Clear. The last time he had been there with Patsy, he had noticed an art gallery in the lobby. Today he mustered up all his courage, walked in, and a nice lady looked at his watercolors one at a time, but did not offer an opinion. When she finished, she asked, "How much are you asking for these, Mr. Campbell?" He was thrown completely. He had never sold anything in his life, much less his own work. He said, "Why don't you name me a price?" She looked at them and counted. "You have 18 paintings here, is that right?" "Yes." She looked again and said, "I can offer you $250. "You're kidding," he said, thrilled beyond belief that she was willing to buy them for so much money. "I wish I could offer you more, Mr. Campbell. These are just excellent, but we're just a small shop." "No, that's fine, I'll take it." When she handed him the check, she said, "I'll be interested in seeing anything else you have, Mr. Campbell." When he got outside, he looked at the check and almost fainted. She had meant $250 a piece. Wow. That's... I need to do that for a second. Like, where is my phone? It's probably in my bag. I'm sorry, but, like, I need to know. Oh, I'm at 3% battery. I need to... Crap. I I don't want to. Okay, so my thing is at 3%, and there's still like so many more pages left that. Hold on a minute. And I'm going to charge it, and just please wait a second. Sorry. Stop. I am so sorry for this, but let's see. Wow, I'm really, really sorry for that. Okay, sorry. Okay. Alright then. I'm just gonna not do that, and we'll just finish reading, and then I'll do that later. Alright. So yeah, she had bet $250 a piece. I will get back to you on that as to how much money that is, because that's going to drive me nuts. Alright, by the end of July, almost all the money they needed had been raised, and everyone was pretty optimistic that the rest would be there on time. The morning before Patsy was to go to Atlanta for her operation, Oswald and Roy had planned to have a little going-away party for her up at the store. Roy came in around 6:45 a.m. The morning before Patsy was to go to Atlanta for her operation, Oswald and Roy had planned to have a little going-away party for her up at the store. Roy came in around 6:45 a.m. to get ready to open and whistled for Jack. "Hey, buddy, your girlfriend's coming to see you." No answer. "What have you gotten yourself into today, you nutty bird? You better not be in the marshmallows again. I don't have time to give you another bath." He wandered around whistling and looking for the bird, and when he had walked toward the front of the store, he saw Jack over in the corner on the floor by the produce, his favorite place to scavenge. "What have you got down? What do you have down there? You better not be pecking those tomatoes again. Mildred will be after you for sure." He went and looked over. Jack was lying on his side. "What are you doing, you silly thing?" When he picked him up, Jack's body felt stiff. Oh, no! Oh, I forgot. Oh, man. Oh, God. I'm sorry. Wow. I almost wish I had cut off the video. Oh, no. Sorry. When he picked him up, Jack's body felt stiff, and his usually bright eyes were strangely dull and glassed over. He looked at the bird again, and then suddenly it hit Roy like a ton of bricks. Jack was dead. Roy stood there in shock. He could not believe it. He could not believe that this cold, lifeless thing he held in his hand was really Jack. At that moment, it seemed the whole world went silent, and all Roy could hear was the sound of his own heart beating. He continued to stand there stunned and not moving until after a while he finally heard Oswald knocking loudly on the front window. He looked up and Oswald waved at him. Roy went over and opened the door. Oswald could see that Roy was white as a sheet. Something was wrong. Roy said, "Come back to my office." Oswald followed him back. "What's the matter, Roy?" Roy closed the door behind him and held him out. "Jack's dead." "Oh my God, what happened?" Roy sat down at his desk and shook his head. "I don't know. I just found him this very minute." Roy picked up the phone and called his veterinarian friend, who told him to look and see if Jack seemed hurt in any way. Roy looked at him and said, "No, he looks fine. There's no blood or anything unusual anywhere." "Well, I don't know what to tell you, Roy. He could have eaten something or caught a virus, or it could have been 100 of things. But these things can happen very fast with birds. One day they're okay, and the next they're gone. I sure am sorry." Roy hung up and looked at Oswald. He doesn't know. The two men just sat there, not knowing what to say, when Oswald suddenly thought of something. Hey, Roy, what about Patsy? What are we going to tell Patsy? Roy looked up. Oh, God, I didn't think about that. Get Frances on the phone and tell her to not let Patsy come up here until we figure out what to do. I'm going to put a closed sign on the door. Oh, my gosh. Oh, no. Oswald dialed Frances while Roy closed the blinds and turned out the lights. Frances picked up the phone. Hello? Oswald said, Frances, it's Oswald. I'm at the store. Where's Patsy? She's right here, Mr. Campbell, just finishing her breakfast. Why? Oh, thank goodness she's still there. Whatever you do, don't let her come up to the store today. Oh, she said, looking over at Patsy and not quite understanding. Well, that's going to be mighty hard. I know it is, but you have to do it. I'll explain later. You just keep her there, Frances. Frances could tell by the tone in Mr. Campbell's voice that whatever was going on must be pretty serious. Patsy was just standing up to leave when Frances blurted out, Oh, honey, I can't let you go up to the store today. Patsy's eyes got big. Why? Oh, the most awful thing has happened. What? She looked over at the little girl who stood waiting for an answer. Poor Roy has the measles, she said, thankful that something came to her at the very last second. Patsy suddenly looked frightened. Oh no, does Jack have the measles too? No, darling, birds don't get measles, only people. Frances could not imagine what had really happened. Both of them knew that Patsy was leaving for the hospital tomorrow, and not seeing Jack would upset her terribly. The only thing she could imagine serious enough was that maybe that crazy and Julian LaPond had finally come across the river one day on a shooting spree and shot Roy. I like how she doesn't, I don't know, the fact that she doesn't think that something could have happened to the bird. In a few minutes, Oswald came into the backyard and caught Frances's eye from the kitchen window. He motioned for her to come over to his house. Frances dried her hands. Honey, I have to run over to Betty's, but I'll be right back. Now promise me you won't move from this house, okay? She handed Patsy a coloring book and went next door. Betty and Oswald were in the living room, huddled together in hushed conversation. What in the world is going on? She asked. Betty said, Sit down, Frances. We have terrible news. Frances put her hand over her mouth. Oh no, it's Roy, isn't it? He's been shot, hasn't he? Is he dead? Betty said, No, it's not Roy, it's Jack. Roy came in this morning and found him. Oh my God, what happened? We don't know, but that's why we didn't want Patsy to come down to the store this morning, Oswald said. Frances sat down. Oh dear God in heaven, what in the world are we going to tell her? You know how she feels about that bird. Oswald said, Yes, I do. How did you keep her home today? I told her Roy has the measles. I don't know what to say. I wasn't thinking straight. I also promised her that she could go up to the store and say goodbye to Jack tomorrow. I didn't know he was dead. Just then, Mildred came barging in the front door. What's going on? I went down to the store and it was closed. Betty shut the door behind her. Jack's dead. Mildred gasped and looked at her sister. Frances said, It's true. Roy came in this morning and found him on the floor. Oh, no, cried Mildred, and then proceeded to collapse on the couch in a heap, wailing. Oh, no, poor little Jack. Oh, that poor little bird. Oh, I just feel so terrible. Oh, the poor little thing. Frances looked at her, and she had lost her mind. Mildred, what is the matter with you? Why are you suddenly carrying on like that? You did nothing but complain about him when he was alive. I know I did, Mildred wailed, but I always liked him. It never occurred to me he would die. Oh, poor little Jack. She then grabbed the lace dolly from the back of Betty Kitchen's couch and used it as a handkerchief, which Betty did not appreciate. Mildred, said Frances, you are without a doubt the strangest woman I ever knew. All you ever did was threaten to cook him. Oh, I know I did, wailed Mildred even louder, and threw herself on the couch again. Frances said, Oh, for God's sake, Mildred, pull yourself together, and turned to Betty and Oswald in amazement. The very time I need her is the very time she decides to fall apart. Later that afternoon, while Patsy was having her nap, Butch, Betty, Dottie, Frances, and Oswald gathered in Roy's office trying to figure out what to do. Francis explained the problem. The doctor told us the operations are going to be very difficult and dangerous, and right now, that bird is the one thing in this world she cares most about. Jack is her best friend. How do you tell a child who's getting ready to go through major surgery that her best friend is dead? Oswald agreed with Francis. I don't see how we can tell her. I think we have to figure out what's more important here, telling the truth or taking a chance on her not making it through the operation. Dottie said, But we can't lie to her, can we? That would be wrong, wouldn't it? She looked around the room. We can't lie to a child, can we? Betty said, Why not, Dottie? You do it every year at Christmas. What's the difference? Speaking as an ex-nurse with some psychological training, I just say go on to Atlanta as if nothing happened. Later, after her operations and the therapy is over, when she's healthy and out of the woods, then we tell her. Yeah, Francis, said Butch. Just don't tell her now. Francis shook her head. That sounds easy, and I agree with you. But the problem is, I know she will not want to leave here in the morning until she tells Jack goodbye. It was all I could do to keep her home today. Dottie thought for a moment. Could we get another Redbird by morning? They all look pretty much alike, don't they? I couldn't tell one from another myself. Betty looked at Dottie as if she was insane and asked, How are you going to catch another Redbird by morning? Besides, she'll know it's not the same bird. Do you think a strange bird is just going to sit on her finger and do tricks? Well, you think of something then, said Dottie. After everybody left, Roy sat holding Jack in his hand. He had been the one to realize that the only person who could help them was the one man in the world he hated. The one man he had vowed never to forgive. But there was no other way. After trying their best to think of something else, they had all came to agree that this was the only solution. Poor skinny, brave Butch offered to go, and so did Betty Kitchen, but since neither of them were familiar with the other side of the river, it was decided that Roy had to go, and he had to go alone. It was the hardest thing he would ever have to do in his life, swallow every ounce of pride he had. But he made the decision to do it anyway. He had to forget about the past just this once. This was for Patsy. He grabbed Jack in a handkerchief and placed him in his jacket pocket. Just as the sun was starting to get low in the sky, he rode across the river to a place where he had spent most of his childhood playing on the river with the Creole families and children he had grown up with, eating gumbo and jambalaya at their mothers' tables. The happy, sunlit place he had once loved was now nothing but a shadowy, murky swamp full of painful memories. Around dusk he had pulled up his boat at the dock, walked to the long gray wooden Creole cottage where Julian LaPon lived, and knocked at the door. No answer. After a while he called out, Julian, it's Roy. I need to talk to you. Still no answer, but someone was moving around inside. A few seconds later, when he heard the unmistakable sound of a gun click, he knew it was Julian on the other side of the screen door. Roy was suddenly overwhelmed with old feelings of rage and humiliation. Rage at the fact that this man had ruined his life. Humiliation that he had to ask for a favor instead of doing what he wanted to do. Reach through the door and pull Julian out in the yard and stomp him to death. As he continued knocking, he was even further humiliated because for some inexplicable reason beyond his control, he began to cry. He stood there with tears running down his face as he tried to talk and hold back the sobs at the same time. Julian, I know you hate my guts, and I hate you, but I want you to look at a picture of this little girl. He took out the photograph of Patsy, and he held it up against the screen so he could see. She's a little crippled girl, Julian, and she's going to have a really bad operation tomorrow. And the bird who was her friend died last night. If she finds out, I don't think she can make it, so I need your help. Then he broke down completely and stood sobbing on the porch like a 10-year-old. Julian, who had the gun aimed right at his chest and was fully prepared to shoot, hesitated for a moment. He must have seen the boy in Roy he had once known so well. After another moment, he slowly put the gun down at his side and walked up closer and walked up closer to the door, looked at the picture, and then said to Roy in his thick Creole accent, "I tell you, I'd kill you dead if you was ever to come over here." "I know," said Roy. "You can kill me later if you want. I don't care anymore. But tonight you have to help me. I'll pay you whatever you want." Julian stood staring at him, but made no move. He could see that in the years that had passed, Roy had grown into quite a man. The only thing Roy noticed in the dim light was Julian's thick, bald, black curly hair had turned silver. As they stood there, with Roy was still pressing the picture of Patsy and Jack against the screen, Roy heard a woman's voice from inside the cottage say, "Let him in." After another moment, Julian growled, "Well, I do it for the little girl, not you, understand?" Roy said. Come on then," Julian said roughly. As Roy stepped in the room, somebody said, "Hello, Roy," and his eyes adjusted to the light. He saw the woman, looking more beautiful than she had the last time he had seen her, years ago. It was Marie. Time had not changed the way he felt about her, and from the look in Marie's eyes, it seemed she felt the same. As the sun was coming up, Julian came in the kitchen and handed Jack's body back to Roy. He had worked all night and done a skillful job. All of Jack's feathers had been carefully cleaned and fluffed up. His eyes were bright and shiny. Somehow Julian managed to take the poor dead bird he had been handed the night before and make it look alive again. Even the way his head cocked to one side and the expression was Jack's. Roy looked at Julian and shook his head. "It's better than I could have hoped for. I don't know what to say, Julian, except thank you." Roy stood up and reached for his wallet in his back pocket. "How much do I owe you?" Julian's eyes flashed with anger. "I tell you, I do it for the little girl. Now go." Roy looked at Marie and nodded goodbye and then rode back across the river with his friend. What Roy didn't know was that the Creoles already knew about the little crippled girl named Patsy and the Redbird who lived on the other side of the river. Their parish priest had been in the audience at one of the shows that Jack and Patsy had done for the Catholic Church over in Lillian. When he talked about it in his sermon the following Sunday, all the Creole children who were not allowed to go across the river to see the Redbird and the little girl. When he had talked about it in his sermon the following Sunday, all the Creole children who were not allowed to go across the river longed to see the Redbird and the girl. And later, when the priest had heard about the Patsy Fund, he had taken up a collection for her in church and sent it over as an anonymous gift. Julian, who had grown even more cold-hearted over the years and hated everybody on the other side, had not donated a dime to the fund and resented those who did. Why should they care about those people? He wouldn't lift a finger to help any of them. But last night, seeing Patsy's face in the photograph smiling at him through the screen door, something happened that changed his mind. He really had done it for the little girl. Oh my god, I'm gonna cry. Oh my god. That was a rough chapter. Oh man. Okay. That was a long chapter. I'm sorry.